Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Husky Dash. This is the first episode of Husky Dash of the 2021 college football season for the Huskies. And I'm your host again, Nathan Mathisen. Glad to be back. What I am not glad about is the Huskies' performance last night. Let's just say it was not up to par. First, I'm just going to talk about being speechless. There's two things in sports that really leave you speechless. You can be speechless from joy, your team having just won the Super Bowl, won the national championship, doing something amazing. And then there can be speechless from your team doing something that you would have never thought been possible. You would have never in a million years imagined it occurring. And that's what the Huskies did last night. They left me speechless in the negative way. I I wouldn't have ever thought Montana would have beaten Washington. I'll give Montana props for that. They played their hearts out. Washington's players, I think they played their hearts out. They just didn't perform up to standard. Before the game, I was talking with one of my friends and how many he asked what the score should be for it to be a good thing for Washington or what wouldn't be a disappointment. And going into it, I thought if the Huskies win by less than 4 touchdowns, it's going to be a disappointment. With all the hype the Huskies had leading up to the season, being the 20th ranked team in the nation, they're supposed to easily handle an FCS school. And Washington didn't do that. They were a major disappointment. So, where really did that happen or how did that happen? Well, it's not one thing, it's not one person, it's not one coach. It's everybody out there could have played better, from the players on the field to the coaches out there on the sidelines could have coached better. Now I'll go more in depth into each of these positions and each of these coaches and how they performed. But for now, just a quick little rundown at the quarterback position. I would grade that as an F. I mean, it wasn't pretty for Dylan Morris really all night long. At the running back position, I'd give him a D. They had a nice first drive, but after that, it was a struggle. And then the receivers, I suppose they get a C minus in my books. They had some drops that could have been caught. They also had some very hard balls thrown to them that made it drops that really made the receivers have a tough job. The offensive line, I'd give an F. And then the defense, just overall grade for them, a C plus. They played a good game. I mean, you only allowed 13 points. Most of the time when you allow 13 points, you're going to win that game. Last night, they didn't win that game. And they're getting a C plus really because no matter how good they played, when the offense needed them to come through, they bent too much, allowing that touchdown in the fourth quarter to Montana and giving up the lead. Oh, and then also the coaching staff. I'm going to be pretty harsh on them and give them an F. They did not coach very well at all, I feel. So now getting more in depth into this, looking at Dylan Morris, I think he got exposed for what he is. He's a game managing quarterback. He takes what the defense gives him. He doesn't go for the big play. He doesn't risk it that often at all. And a game manager can succeed. You can be a great quarterback in college and be just a game manager. But with being a great game manager in college, you also have to have great weapons. The Huskies last night did not have great weapons. One piece of note for that is after the first drive, they were already down their top 4 wide receivers. They went into the day down Trell Bynum, down Roma Dunze, and down Jalen McMillan. Those 3 were all out. Jalen had that hand injury, which is why he was likely out. The other 2, there was no injury reported for them, but they were clearly injured or something was wrong with them for them not to play. And then after the first drive, Jalen Polk, I do not believe, came back into the game with an injury. So that hurts when you've got a quarterback who's not explosive, in my opinion. He's not going to wow you with his arm talent. He's not going to wow you on the ground running the ball. He's going to throw it to the open receiver. And the receivers thus he's had struggled to get open. Now, Morris, he likes to model his game after Drew Brees. I believe I've seen him said or I've read about him. And he really isn't a Drew Brees in his accuracy is not nearly as good as Drew Brees is. Drew Brees can succeed with having not the strongest arm. He's not the fastest, but he was a very accurate quarterback. Dylan Morris last night was not a very accurate quarterback. He was routinely throwing his receivers poorly placed balls. Yeah, some of them hit the receiver's hands, but it's very hard to stop on a dot and catch a ball that's almost a full arm length behind you. You can get a hand on it, but that's going to be tough to catch. And so Morris ended up last night throwing 3 interceptions. 2 of those went off his own player's hands, like I just mentioned, how he threw it behind him. The first one was to Devin Culp, I believe, and the second one was to Cade Otton. Those 2 first balls, they could have been caught, but then they also were not good passes at all. They were both little short. I believe they were both 5-yard out routes. At least the Cade Otton's was. Devin Culp's might have been a crossing route or a little leak out to the side. And both times, not a long pass. Dylan Morris throws him a pretty hard pass with all their momentum carrying him towards the sidelines, only he throws it way behind them where all they get is kind of a hand on it, tipping it up right to the defender. That's not an accurate pass. You need to be accurate, especially on these little short routes if you're Dylan Morris. Now, the third interception, there was no excuse for that one. It was just a very poor decision by Dylan Morris. Game on the line. He's trying to recreate his Utah drive from last year where he won the game, and he fell short last night. On the final drive, he threw the interception. It was 2nd and 10, I believe. Don't exactly remember the yard line, but so they had 2 tight ends in, three three players up on the left side, 2 tight ends. So you had from the outside, I believe it was Giles Jackson, then Devin Culp, and then Cade Otton on the closest to the line. And Cade Otton ran kind of a rounded off 10, 15-yard in route. The Montana looked to be playing kind of a zone, and the Mike linebacker simply dropped straight back and shadowed in front of Cade Otton. I don't know if Dylan Morris never saw him or what happened because Morris basically just threw it right to that Mike linebacker. And even if Morris had been able to get that ball past that Mike linebacker, wasn't really hope for Cade Otton to maybe even make that catch as he actually had 2 players directly above him that would have easily lit him up, could have maybe got a hand in there and knocked the ball away. So overall, it wasn't a good decision making for the player who's been praised for being a great decision maker, for not taking these risks. And really, the one time Dylan Morris takes that risk, the one time he doesn't seem to check down, as that's what he was doing for the majority of the game, it appeared, checking down to the safety option, the running back on a little flare, the little guy or the tight end running a little 5-yard button hook, just sitting there. But the one time he didn't do that was the time he needed to. As on that interception play, he had Richard Newton on a little running back flare route, kind of running out to the sideline, wide open. The nearest guy to him was probably 5 yards away from him, and Newton could have gotten the first down or at least gotten positive yards and gotten out of bounds. He even had another guy open. He had Taj Davis, it was running just a little drag route, like basically at the line of scrimmage. He got bumped kind of right as Dylan Morris chose to throw it to Cade Otton. So had Dylan Morris waited another second, and he had the time, he had a good pocket on that play. Had he been able to wait, Taj Davis would have been wide open with his nearest guy within 10 yards of him and been able to get out of bounds with some yards and maybe even gotten a first down. So Dylan Morris's decision making was not up to standard last night. Now, the route selection was also a topic of discussion. It it seemed as though the Huskies were running the same play over and over again. And in crunch time, when Washington needs a score, as they're down after Montana scored the touchdown with 10 minutes to go, Morris only had one completion farther than 10 yards in the final 10 minutes. He was routinely either throwing to, like I said, the check down player, or Washington was simply running the slant routes and little 5 yard button hooks, which even the slant routes seemed to be trouble for Morris completing. He kept throwing it behind the receiver or too high for the receiver, where the receiver wasn't able to make the catch. On a key play, I want to say it was the 4th and 10 or 4th and 12 towards the fourth quarter when Washington was going for it when it was still just that 10-7 game. And he throws it to Giles Jackson running the slant route. It hits Jackson in his hand, so he should have caught it. It looked as though he kind of didn't turn his hands to the ball. He kind of had it as if it's an over the shoulder route. So that may have made it harder for Jackson to catch it. He might have wanted to have turned his hands. But I mean, Dylan Morris could have still thrown a better ball than that. I mean, Giles Jackson kind of had to dive for that slant route. You shouldn't really have to dive for that ball. Morris should have been able to put a better ball on it, put it on his chest. He didn't need to get too many yards after. He could have just put it to where he could just catch it and go down. But instead, he made it where he had to kind of lunge out and he couldn't call it in. So Morris's accuracy, Morris's well, not Morris's, but the route selections that the coaches did, because that's not on Morris. That falls to the coaches and John Donovan not calling plays that'll actually be helpful in moving the ball down the field with some urgency, because that's what they needed. They needed urgency. They got away with it against Utah. If you look back to Washington's final drive against Utah last year when they were looking to score and win the game, it was these short routes, these not really going no huddle, just this slow paced, methodical drive, which in the end, Washington scored. So it all worked out. But against Montana, it didn't all work out. They didn't score on the methodical drive. So the play calling was a big question mark. And looking at like the offensive line, even for Washington, the mighty offensive line that these coaches and a lot of people have talked up a lot, looking at them as one of the best in the country. They've got some veterans, they've got guys returning who've been there for a while. They've got some big bodies up front. I mean, last year for Washington, they allowed only one sack in the 4 games. Against an FCS school in Montana, they allowed 3 sacks. How does that happen? Montana was getting constant pressure. The Washington O-line failed to open up holes for the running game all game long besides the first drive. And that's one thing that in a million years I would have never guessed would have happened. I would have never thought the offensive line would have struggled against Montana. That's no disrespect to Montana. Montana showed that they came to play. But Washington simply has these blue chip prospects, these huge players who should be able to open up holes against a school like Montana, who's a smaller school, FCS school, doesn't have the recruits Washington has. Yet, Montana clearly did something that disrupted Washington's offensive line. I mean, looking at the struggle for the offensive line, how shocked I was. Every other struggle the Huskies had, I could have seen that happening. I could have seen Dylan Morris struggling for sure. I could have seen the wide receivers having some drops and kind of struggling a little bit. As last year, that's what happened. The receivers last year had some key drops. I could have even seen this mighty Washington defense bending a bit more than we would have liked, allowing some plays to happen, kind of missed assignments. But the offensive line being outplayed by an FCS school, no, I would have never guessed that in a million years. But now, getting on to what lessons can you really learn? What can you really take away from this game against Montana? And well, for starters, I hope I hope the coaching staff sees this, but there's a serious problem on the offensive side of the ball. If Washington, I'm looking at the stats here, can only rush for 53 yards, and it was minus 24 for Dylan Morris with 3 sacks. So it was closer to 77 actual rushing yards, which even that, if you can only do 77 rushing yards on 22 attempts against an FCS school, something's wrong. And it's weird because all camp, like everyone was looking like it's going to be a running back by committee approach, right? They got four running backs in Richard Newton, Cam Davis, Kamari Pleasant, and Sean McGrew, who you think will see action. And I recall John Donovan saying that he doesn't want to play all four. I thought he might have said that. I might be wrong with that. And he didn't play all four. A majority of the game was Richard Newton, or at least majority of the carries were Richard Newton, with Cam Davis getting a few. But Richard Newton had 17 carries, 62 yards, no touchdowns. And then Cam Davis, 4 carries for 8 yards. However, a lot of those yards by Newton came on the first drive. Just looking at the first drive's play by play, you've got Newton getting around 20 of his yards right there in the first drive. So for the rest of the game, he didn't get 50 rushing yards. And that's weird because for the first quarter or for the first drive, it looked like what everyone expected. Washington was simply going to drive down and score consistently against Montana. But that didn't happen as this offense is broke. I mean, how do you fix this offense is really the next thing. Now, the big drastic change, of course, could be playing Heward over Morris. I mean, I'm sure the fans want to see that. I've seen on Twitter, I heard people talking about it at the game, how they want Heward. And do I see this happening? No, I don't. At least against Michigan, I don't see it happening. I give it really no chance. And from Lake at the press conference was asked about what he thinks about a quarterback change or something along that lines, and he said he hasn't given it any thought at all. And that's kind of what I would have predicted from Lake. From what I've heard from Lake in press conferences and interviews, he seems to be a bit stubborn to him. And everyone has this. Like last year, this stubbornness with Lake was running the ball, wearing the run the damn ball hat, wanting to play football his style. He's a defensive coach. He wants his offense to be a bunch of bruisers. He wants them to run the ball down the opponent's throat. He's not going to change when college football is evolving to a big passing, spread the ball out, get these huge plays, get a running quarterback running around back there as well. He doesn't seem like he's going to evolve to this. So I don't see a world where he backtracks on Dylan Morris after only 1 week. After all the praise he gave to him in fall camp, he's not going to backtrack on that. He's not going to show that he was wrong. He's not going to kind of admit that he accepts that and play Heward. But I mean, maybe that's what needs to happen. So what that Morris was the starter last year. So what if Morris looked better than Heward in practice all fall camp, all spring camp? Because I went to a handful of those practices and that's what I saw. So I see why Morris started week one. Heward looked shaky at practice. He didn't have a very tight spiral. And Heward though show improvement. And you got to look at it as Heward is a true freshman. He's a young guy. He was playing high school football last year. And so it takes some time transitioning to college football. And you could see huge strides actually in Heward's ball as fall camp went on. Towards the last few practices, Heward was throwing that tight spiral with more consistency. He was hitting his receivers in stride. He was performing well. Yet at this point, Morris had already been named the starter. And I look at it like Morris last year struggled in games with accuracy, and he looked overwhelmed at times in the pocket last year. And what did we see against Montana? Morris struggled with his accuracy. He struggled with staying comfortable in the pocket. Looking at the K Dot play, or not the K Dot play, but the interception when he was throwing the K Dot towards the third quarter, I believe it might have been. But what was Morris doing? So the pocket was well structured. He had a hole right up the middle. Instead of stepping up throw, making the throw, Morris appeared to I almost think he was kind of thrown from his back foot. He didn't step forward. He didn't get his whole body into the throw. He kind of stayed on his flat on his feet and made an inaccurate throw to Kate On, and it ended up being intercepted. Now, Heward is a five-star QB for a reason. His potential is through the roof. He might make mistakes. That's what true freshman quarterbacks do. But the ceiling that Heward has, I think, or the ceiling that Heward gives the Huskies, I feel is higher than the ceiling that Morris gives the team. Like I said before, Morris is kind of a game manager. Morris is not going to electrify the crowd. He's not going to make these huge 50-yard passes rolling out of the pocket. He's not going to just do these wild things that some QBs do. He's going to take the safe route. He's going to throw it to the check down if his first and second read probably aren't open. Eward will give you that risk, I think. And that's what you need, I think, to get to the next step, to get to the college football playoffs. You need a quarterback who's going to take risk. You need a quarterback with extreme talent. And that's what Heward is. He was a five-star recruit. That shows that he has the talent or he has the potential to get to that talent. The Huskies just need to let him play. They just need to put him out there in the game and see what he has. They're not going to have him sit this whole year. And then, if they have the Heward sits all this year, this whole year, that would, put a lot on Heward for next season. As now he's not competing against a guy who started in a COVID year just playing 4 games. He's competing against a guy who's been a 2-year starter at Washington. That's going to be tough for Heward to get that. What's going to change really from now until next year that'll make Heward get the job for Morris? I guess maybe Heward will improve a bit in practice, but it's still practice. You're not going to see his true potential. He's not going to be able to wow you and really show why he's that five-star in practice. He needs to be put out in a game to show that. But like I said, I don't see the Heward transition happening against Michigan. Now, if Morris struggles mightily again against Michigan, it could happen before the Arkansas State game. But again, it's tough for me to see Lake doing that transition. Now, another lesson to learn from this game is don't take an opponent for granted. Now, did Washington take this Montana for granted? I don't know. Maybe. But after the first drive, it certainly looked like something gave. I mean, they got a little overconfident or something. As on the first drive I mentioned, they marched down that field. 9 plays, 78 yards in less than 5 minutes, scoring a touchdown. They didn't do that the rest of the game. Didn't score again the rest of the game. Their next drive was another 9 play drive. So they still had that confidence. Yet that drive ended on downs as Washington didn't have confidence in their kicker, Peyton Henry, to make a field goal really. So they went for it on I think it was 4th and 12 actually, didn't convert. The next possessions were 5 plays, 3 plays, 7 plays, 4 plays, and 4 plays. They weren't able to control the possession. That's what Washington wants to do. That's why they love running the ball. Control the possession. That's what a team that has a great defense wants to do. Washington wasn't able to do that. Now, enough of this sad Montana game. Let's transition on and talk about the upcoming games. Let's talk about next week. So, next week, Washington is heading to face Michigan in Ann Arbor. 2 days ago, if you'd asked me, I would have guessed that Washington would be favored, as Washington was the team that was getting the kind of preseason hype. They were getting the not national media. They're not getting too much of that. They weren't, but they were still ranked number 20. Well, Michigan was looked at as not being as good as they had been in previous years. They were looked at as a team that might not perform up to kind of Michigan standard. I mean, they were unranked. Now you fast forward to today, you fast forward to last night after the Husky game. Well, Michigan took care of business against their, I'll call them inferior opponent. No disrespect to them. It was Western Michigan. Michigan was playing. Michigan took care of them. Michigan won 47-14. Now Washington against their inferior, their FCS team they played in Montana, they did not take care of business. They lost 7-13. I'm just saying that I still can't believe it's real. 7 points. You put up 7 points against an FCS school. That's not something you see really too often or ever really. I think I saw on Twitter a quick thing saying the last time an FCS or a Power Five school only put up single digits against an FCS school was Oregon State back in like 1980s, 1985 it might have been. So that doesn't happen often. Yet it did. So can Washington turn it around, not just against Michigan, but for the rest of the season? It's going to be tough, especially against Michigan. I mean, the Huskies. I hope they're angry. I hope they're not going to just be sad and kind of dejected and think, "Oh, our season's over." I hope they come out with fight against Michigan. I hope they perform up to standards. I hope they show that this Montana game was just a blimp. And I see they could do that. They have some good leaders on the team. Edefon Ulofoshio's a voice of the defense, very vocal leader. They've got some stars out there who command the attention of the locker room. Those guys have to set set the example throughout practice this week and get them turned around, get them on the right track. Because yeah, Michigan dominated Western Michigan, and yeah, Montana beat us. But still, I think Washington has the talent. Washington has the potential to be good the rest of this year. They have the players. They just need to put it all together with the play calls, with doing your job on offense, doing your job on defense, manning your assignment. And if Washington can do that, then they can turn it around without making drastic changes like quarterback changes or big position changes. One thing that I do think Washington might do is do maybe more of that running back by committee. Even though I don't like that, But if none of your running backs are succeeding, maybe try another one. Maybe they could have played Sean McGrew a bit. Maybe they could have played Kamari Pleasant. Maybe they could have found the hole. Or maybe there really was no hole. Maybe the offensive line couldn't open up a hole. And that's why the running backs weren't doing anything. But overall, I think Washington can turn around. It's out of conference, so I guess, they could still win the Pac-12 or get to the Pac-12 championship and win that. It's not looking like good odds at this moment, but we all know in college football, teams can flip the switch quickly. Teams can get on the right side of it and make some big plays. But now that is all the time I have for today. It's been good being back here on Dash Sports talking to you all and just dissecting the Husky football. If you like more of this, then follow Dash Sports on all social media. They're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, I think Facebook even, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube. Now, that is it for me today. Again, I'm Nathan Mathisen. It's been a pleasure, and I will see you next week. Thank you.